Welcome to Aging Disgracefully, a weekly oddcast of seriously funny and sometimes raunchy monologues. I'm Carolyn Meyer, and I have a story for you. Episode number 20, My Mother's Secret. My mother had everything a girl could want. She was beautiful with wavy hair and sapphire blue eyes. She was talented, an accomplished pianist. She was popular. In high school, she always dated the handsomest boys, and one of them was Charles. After high school, Charles went to college to study business and accounting, and Sarah attended a conservatory of music in Philadelphia and returned home after graduation to give piano lessons. Charles asked Sarah to marry him. Sarah's father gave them his blessing, and he also gave Charles a job in his lumber business. Then Sarah changed her mind. Broken-hearted, Charles moved away. Vic Meyer came to town soon after that, and a year later, Vic and Sarah were married. 2 years after that, I was born, their only child. I was Daddy's little girl and Mummy's big disappointment. I wasn't beautiful like my mother or talented as she was. And as I got older, I wasn't popular either. Smart, yes, but not popular. And I didn't have that secret ingredient that my mother prized, personality plus. I spent the early years of my life trying to please my mother, but nothing was ever quite good enough. And while she was alive, my dad was always there to get my back, but he died when he was 58, leaving me to contend with Mummy, who still didn't approve of me. So now let's pick up the story some 15 years later, after my father's death, when my mother is about to turn 70. I'm living in New Mexico. I go back to Pennsylvania to visit my mother, but these visits are tense and critical and guilt-inducing. And after I leave, there are phone calls, and they almost never end well. "I never did to my mother what you're doing to me," she says. Some of my mother's old friends and former neighbors are still around, but there have been other changes in her life. Now there is Cindy, a young woman in her 20s whom my mother has hired as a companion. Cindy is very pretty and agreeable, although in my opinion not terribly bright. Most importantly, though, Cindy has become a surrogate, a stand-in for the daughter that I've never managed to be. Cindy pays attention, my mother says, and I come to understand from hints that are dropped that my mother has made certain promises of items that she might expect to be given someday when the time comes. Jewelry, a diamond ring, for instance. Besides Cindy, there's Reverend Gerald Spiegelmeyer, the preacher at my mother's church, the same church where she met my dad and where they were married, where I was baptized, confirmed. Reverend Spiggy is youngish, younger than I am, and recently divorced, probably lonely. He and my mother are seen having lunch together at the Elks Club at least once a week, and sometimes dinner, too. At first, I suspect my mother might be trying to set Reverend Spiggy up with Cindy, but that doesn't seem to be her plan. She wants all his attention for herself. They take trips to the Jersey Shore in her Lincoln Town car. Reverend Spiggy likes to drive, Mother tells me. It's a little like driving Miss Daisy. She puts the preacher up in a motel while she and her old friend, Maisie, hang out together. And there's someone else, Charles, her long-ago fiancé. Mary, the woman Charles married years ago after my mother dumped him, is still alive and well. But Charles has never gotten over Sarah. Once a month, he has a board meeting, a board of directors somewhere in the town where he's living since the dumping. And on the way home to Mary, he stops off at a payphone and calls my mother. And they talk and talk. He says he loves me, my mother tells me on one of my infrequent visits. And I'm not sure if she's bragging or complaining. I don't want any of that sex stuff, she snorts. But I can tell that she likes the attention, and she isn't quite sure how to handle it. And, of course, there's Mary. Married her on the rebound, my mother says. This is how it stands when I go back to visit her in the spring before my mother is to turn 70. That visit is not quite so virulent as they were after my move out west, and we actually part on pretty good terms. I decide without telling her that I will come back in July and arrange a party to celebrate her 70th birthday. But on Mother's Day, just 2 weeks after I've returned to New Mexico, her doctor calls me. Your mother's had a heart attack, he tells me. She died last night. Stunned, I fly back to Pennsylvania to plan a funeral, not a birthday party. Reverend Spiggy picks me up at the airport in Harrisburg in the Lincoln town car. I'm an only child. There's no one to argue with, plan with, grieve with. I'm alone in this. I wander through the silent house. Everything is in perfect order, as it always was. There's a Mother's Day card on her dresser. I pick it up, thinking it must be from Cindy. Inside is a note. This should have been our day. All my love, Charles. The card is next to the sterling silver dresser set he'd given her as an engagement gift nearly half a century before. Charles is the first person I call. I tell him the news, and he begins to sob. A few hours later, the florist arrives with a dozen yellow roses. The card is signed by Charles. The second call is to Maisie, who promises to come to the funeral. The next few days pass in a blur. I talk to my mother's doctor, John. I meet with her lawyer, Stanley. I call on Ralph, the undertaker, and pick out his casket. Reverend Spiggy and I discuss the funeral. Ted, her next-door neighbor for many years, arrives with a baked ham. I call Fred, the current church organist, and we talk about the music she'd most likely hear. Probably Bach, one of the few things my mother and I actually agreed on. Dick, the editor of the Lewistown Sentinel, and my dad's old friend, stops by to ask what I want in the obituary. Who knew there was so much to be done? I sleep in my old bedroom, but Maisie is planning to come to the funeral, and I check on the guest room before she arrives. My mother had begun taking art classes, producing lots and lots of flower paintings, and she had turned the guest room into her studio. In the closet, I discover a half-dozen canvases stacked facing the wall. They're good sized, about, 3 by 4 or 5 maybe. They're flower paintings or still lifes of fruit. But then I pull them out one by one. They are not tulips or apples. They are paintings of male nudes, full frontal, 6 of them in a variety of poses, but all of the same man, or at least the same genitalia. And those genitalia are impressively rendered. Well, I'm surprised to say the least. But here's the most surprising thing of all. In all 6 paintings, the man is wearing a Halloween mask. Popeye, Dopey, Santa Claus, Pinocchio, the Devil, Ronald Reagan. The paintings are signed with my mother's initials, SKM. Who is this masked man? I have no idea. The man is neither old nor young. I don't think it's my dad, but I'm not really sure. I moved the paintings out of the guest room closet and into my own, and I'm not about to say anything about this to Maisie. By the day of the funeral, 3 days later, I still don't know who it is. Maisie and I sit in the front pew of the church near the casket. Cindy makes a grand entrance, dramatically veiled in black, and she drifts down the aisle and takes a seat in the front row across from me, as though we're guests at a wedding and have to choose either the bride's side or the groom's. She dabs at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Charles and Mary arrive and settle into the pew behind me. Charles reaches over and squeezes my shoulder. Is it him? I wonder. Is that Charles in the paintings? The service begins. Fred is at the organ cranking out Bach and some hymns, and Reverend Spiggy in a black robe reads the biblical passages that I picked out and then the eulogy that he composed. I'm sure he spent more time with my mother recently than I had. Could the organist be the masked man? Could it be Reverend Spiggy? The pallbearers, Ted, John, Walter, Stanley, Dick, is it one of them? The day after the funeral, Maisie leaves, and I begin the arduous task of going through my mother's things. Cindy comes by and offers to help and to point out items she claims my mother had promised her, her mink jacket and some jewelry, including the diamond ring and my grandmother's watch. I send her away with an antique quilt and try not to show how much she irritates me. Some decisions are easy. I give the baby grand piano to the church. They're close to the Salvation Army. I deliver the flower paintings to a retirement home. And then I pack my mother's nudes into a box labeled SKM Art and tag the box for storage, along with the antique corner cupboard, the dining table and chairs, the cartons of china, the silver tea service. Mayflower will pick it all up and store it until I have a house big enough to hold at least some of it. In the meantime, my mother's house will be sold. I hand the keys over to Walter, my father's old business partner, who hugs me and promises to take care of everything. Is it Walter? Is he the masked man? Reverend Spiggy drives me to the airport in the Lincoln Town Car, which I sell to him really cheap. 2 years after my mother's death, I move out of the tiny house in Santa Fe and into a bigger one. And I contact Mayflower and arrange to have the antiques and the cartons of silver and china and the box labeled SKM Art shipped to my new home. It's an exciting day when the big Mayflower truck pulls up in front of the house. And the moving men carry in the corner cupboard the table and chairs and the cartons of china and silver. It's all there except the box labeled SKM Art. It's not there. It's gone. I sign the paperwork for everything else, file a report for the missing box. The moving company has no record of it. Now I have 2 mysteries. What happened to those paintings? Somebody took that box, and it's secret, and I have no idea who that might have been. Was it the masked man? And who is the masked man in those paintings? That was my mother's secret, and she took it with her to her grave. But now I have a confession to make. I have a secret too. The story I've just told you, my mother's secret, is only half true. The first half, right up to when I find the paintings in the guest room closet. There were no pictures of a nude man in a mask. My mother never painted anything, not even a flower. I made up the whole story because, well, I like to think that at some point, my mother, Sarah, did have a secret, and that even she was aging disgracefully. Well, you can read this and other stories on my blog at funnycarolyn.com, but come back next week for episode number 21. My friend Lusty Banger, retired porn star, will be back with me again. And unlike my mother, she doesn't have any secrets. You won't want to miss this one. I'm Carolyn Meyer, and I'm aging disgracefully.